Just imagine waking up at 2 in the morning, and then Caracas, the very capital of Venezuela, is suddenly being bombed in different places. Hits that are clearly planned and simultaneous. The sound of helicopters, sudden blackout, thick smoke, raging fire, and movements that clearly follow the doctrine of special forces. Blind, cut off, paralyze, infiltrate, control, and in an unexpected way extract. Because yes, Nicolas Maduro and his wife Cecilia Flores were captured and extracted from Caracas, Venezuela by the United States Delta Forces. And this is the only and official photo so far of Nicolas Maduro after being captured on the dining area of the warship United States ship Iwo Jima. In this video, we will show you a detailed, technical, and step-by-step reconstruction of the military operation now called Operation Absolute Resolve. One of the most shocking military operations witnessed by Latin America in many decades. But before we start that, if you're new to our channel, please don't forget to subscribe so you'll always be updated with videos like this. To understand how it led to the capture of Nicolas Maduro, we first need to go back a bit and put the events in the right context. And I promise this won't take long. On September 3, 2025, the tension between Washington and Caracas reached a level not seen in decades. On that day, Donald Trump announced early that 11 narco-terrorists were killed in targeted and precise attacks against narco boats in the southern Caribbean Sea. This was presented as a direct offensive against maritime trafficking networks that, according to Washington, are connected to the very inner circle of the Venezuelan regime. And instead of stopping, the kinetic attacks against maritime vessels continued even more in the following weeks. However, the real change came on November 16, 2025, when the aircraft carrier United States ship Gerald Ardford entered the southern Caribbean, very close to Venezuelan territory. At the same time, the United States formally announced the activation of Operation Southern Spear, which was officially introduced as a campaign against prohibited activities. The operation directly accused Nicolas Maduro's government of systematic involvement in prohibited trafficking between Venezuela and Colombia, especially with the so-called Carter de las Soles. From that moment on, Southern Spear was no longer just words or rhetoric. It became a continuous and actual military campaign. There were consecutive attacks against narco boats and semi-submersible vessels in the southern Caribbean, as well as in the international waters of the Eastern Pacific. And yes, even Colombian narco boats. Based on the latest data available as of December 31, 2025, the results are clear. No less than 150 people were killed and identified as narco-terrorists in 35 separate attacks against 36 vessels ranging from narco boats to semi-submersibles. However, as the months passed, the tone of the discourse gradually changed, and a factor began to emerge that strategists in the global market and governments around the world always keep an eye on: oil. On December 11, 2025, the United States took an unprecedented step: the confiscation of the very first oil tanker carrying oil from Venezuela. The ship skipper was carrying Mary 16, a type of heavy and high-acidity crude oil that is the hallmark of Venezuela's production. And the escalation doesn't end there. Just 6 days later, on December 17, Washington announced a complete and total ban. It was banned for tankers and non-oil vessels under sanctions. Their entry and exit from Venezuela was prohibited, no matter what flag they carried. Practically, this is an economic maritime siege. And to make the message even clearer, just a few days later, the seizure of the second tanker was announced, and the next day, the third one. In addition, the Americans pursued several weeks of chasing after the first tanker, Bella 1. And this is where we reached the point of no return. January 3, 2026, there were no more warnings, no more press releases, no new sanctions. Instead, a direct blow struck right at the heart of Chavismo in Venezuela. 1:15 in the early morning Caracas time, strange sounds could be heard in the sky. Before the light, before the explosion, before the blackout, a deep and continuous roar of high-performance aircraft engines and the sound of helicopters in the distance. By 1:55 a.m., alerts were coming one after another in Venezuela. There's a strange noise. Something is happening in the sky, and clearly this isn't just an ordinary airplane. Exactly at 2 in the morning, the phase that would define the entire operation began. A loud explosion shook the southern part of the capital, and almost at the same time, large areas of the city were plunged into darkness. The first major target was Fuerte Tiuna, the most important military complex in Venezuela. This is where the offices of the highest-ranking leadership are located, including the Ministry of Defense, the General Command of the Army, and the Strategic Operational Command of the Armed Forces of Venezuela. According to reports, the flames could be seen from several kilometers away, along with a massive column of smoke rising into the sky. When dawn broke, the Generalissimo Francisco de Miranda base, better known as La Carlota, was also hit. Multiple explosions were reported with thick black smoke over the city and damage to the runways and hangars. From a tactical perspective, this perfectly matches one of my priorities: destroy the enemy's air assets before they can respond. If the plan is to bring special operations helicopters into a hostile capital, there's one risk that's greater than all the others. The possibility of an enemy jet or helicopter would make a transport helicopter like the Chinook an easy target. So in the logic of this operation, La Carlota is not optional. At that point in the early morning, Caracas was no longer just confused. It was strategically isolated as it gradually lost control of its airspace. Around 2:18 a.m., anti-aircraft sirens began to be reported, security movements, and a tight security cordon around the Miraflores Palace. Based on Donald Trump's statements, we now know that Nicolas Maduro was likely fleeing from the Miraflores Palace to a safe house location, or for protection, but he couldn't reach it. Trump said he was in a house that looked more like a hideout than a regular home. It had steel doors and a security room surrounded by solid steel on all sides. He tried to get in there, but the attack happened so quickly that he couldn't do it. I remember we brought powerful torches to cut through the steel if necessary, but we didn't need them because he never made it to that part of the house. Around 2:20 in the morning, one of the most well-timed yet most decisive moves of the entire operation was carried out: a surgical strike against the communication and surveillance infrastructure. Almost simultaneously, the antennas, radar system, and a critical communication node located at 0L Vulcan were neutralized through precise bombings. By 2:27 a.m., the attack on Iguarete Airport was reported. The early closure of these routes is a classic move in operations targeting high-value individuals. It's a way to cut off all possible escape routes. At around 2:35 a.m., explosions were reported at the La Guaira port and around Maiqueta International Airport. In just one night and in less than 30 minutes, you hit La Carlota, Maiqueta, and Iguarete simultaneously. There's only one clear tactical message: Caracas no longer has control over its airspace. Nowhere is safe anymore. There is no more air corridor. I am no longer surrounded. And the situation became even clearer when the United States issued a notice to airmen restricting civilian air traffic in Venezuelan airspace. In military terms, that only means one thing: Venezuela's airspace has officially entered the realm of military operations. And now, this is where we reach the very core of the entire operation: the capture of Nicolas Maduro and Leah Flores, which took place at around 2:01 in the morning Caracas time. Based on the reports used for this reconstruction, the actual capture operation was carried out by the 1st Special Forces Operation Detachment Delta, better known as Delta Force. This unit is also known as the Combat Application Group, or more simply, Delta Force. The entry of Delta Force was carried out through air insertion, led by the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, the legends known as the Night Stalkers. The videos showing the presence of the mission helicopter, 47G Chinook helicopter, are clear evidence that the Night Stalkers were actively involved, with significant insertion of Delta operators along with heavy equipment and the capability for immediate extraction even under enemy fire. The mission helicopter, 47G Chinook, is not an ordinary helicopter. It can fly extremely long distances, refuel while in the air, and operate using an advanced navigation system for low-level night flights. This is effective for silent, fast, and precise operations, especially in a hostile capital. Reports also include the presence of armed helicopters like the Mission Helicopter, 60M Black Hawk, and the Direct Action Penetrator configuration, which stands for Direct Action Penetrator. The Direct Action Penetrator is a heavily armed variant used exclusively by the Night Stalker. Depending on the mission, it can be configured with various deadly weapons such as a 30mm cannon, similar to the one used by the AH, 64 Apache M134 miniguns on both sides, 70mm Hydra rockets and air-to-ground missile, 114 Hellfire missiles. In other words, while Delta Force is moving in on the ground, there's heavy firepower in the air to make sure no one interferes and no one escapes. In addition, these helicopters have YT 706 GET 700 engines that are more powerful than the standard engines of a regular Black Hawk. Because of this, it can fly even with extra weapons weight, even in extreme heat and high-altitude conditions. It also has the AN Seinschach ES APAQ-174 Silent Night radar, a terrain-following radar that allows it to fly at very low altitudes, known as nap of the Earth flight, even in harsh weather conditions while avoiding detection. That's why the use of this type of aircraft sends a clear message. This isn't just an HBT extraction, it's a combat mission. And we also can't ignore the possible presence of the AH-6 Little Bird, lightweight yet highly effective helicopters, perfect for urban environments, close air support, and precision surveillance in narrow streets. Now at around 3:20 in the morning, the moment arrived that no one expected, not even the Venezuelans themselves. On his official social media account, Donald Trump announced that Nicolas Maduro and Leia Flores had been captured and that they had been released by Venezuela. For the viewers, a more troubling question suddenly arises. How did a highly protected target fall in just a few minutes? That's what we'll discuss later, but before that, let us continue explaining what happened in the following minutes. After one of the boldest and most daring operations ever seen in Latin America. Around 12 o'clock midnight, Defense Minister Vladimir Padrino Lopez, who was previously reported to have been killed, appeared and proved he was alive. In an official statement, he strongly condemned the United States attack and announced the start of a damage assessment. This message was really cautious, institutional, and almost mechanical. No details, no numbers, and really no certainty. But just a few minutes later, Vice President Delcy Rodriguez appeared on national television. She directly addressed the President of America and, in an emotional and angry speech, demanded immediate proof that Nicolas Maduro and his wife, Celia Flores, were alive. Our country was violated, attacked, and subjected to aggression in the face of this brutal situation and this violent assault. We have no knowledge of the whereabouts of President Nicolas Maduro and First Lady Celia Flores. We demand from Donald Trump's government immediate proof that they are alive. In terms of the narrative, this moment is very important because such a call has a painful implication. The highest leadership of the Venezuelan state is uncertain about the whereabouts of their own president. And this is where Diosdado Cabello comes into the scene. About 30 minutes after the first statement, Diosdado Cabello, the interior minister and considered the right-hand man of Nicolas Maduro, appeared. But this time, he was not in the office. He was on the street, surrounded by a tight security cordon, wearing a bulletproof vest and an armored helmet. This was a classic move in the midst of a crisis. When there is a sudden vacuum of power, someone needs to fill it. Someone needs to show presence. Someone needs to signal that there is still a state, there is still leadership, and there is still control. This is not just for the country, it is also a message for the whole world. On the international level, Caracas's allies, Cuba, Russia, Iran, Nicaragua, and Belarus, immediately issued strong condemnations. Meanwhile, the regional countries that have long been critical of Chavismo are being very cautious. Some quietly celebrated, some showed restraint, and some chose to wait first. At the same time, Venezuela formally requested an immediate emergency meeting at the United Nations Security Council. While the world, you, me, and everyone else are still trying to absorb the weight of an event that has shaken the very foundation of global order, listen closely because this is where the most surprising details will begin to emerge. At around 10:30 in the morning United States time, Donald Trump released a formal statement. Here he revealed many important details about the operation. He clarified the points that had previously only circulated as initial reports and fragments of information. According to him, last night until early this morning, under my direct orders, the United States Armed Forces carried out a remarkable military operation in the capital of Venezuela. An extraordinary military operation, a clear and direct display of power, and a moment that truly changed the course of history in the region. And this is where the so-called cherry on top arrived, the official statement from General Dane Kane. A message carefully crafted to convey something clear. This operation was not sudden, not an accident, and certainly not limited. In his statement, General Kane explained that the operation called Operation Absolute Resolve, or Operation Firm Resolution, was carried out quietly, efficiently, and in a planned manner, and was executed in the darkest hours of the night. The general also emphasized that this mission required complete coordination among all components of the joint force: soldiers, sailors, pilots, and other units who acted simultaneously together with multiple intelligence agencies. He specifically mentioned the CIA, National Security Agency, and National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. General Kane also revealed that after several months of thorough intelligence work, United States analysts were able to exactly reconstruct the daily movements of Nicolas Maduro. Where does he live? What routes does he take? What places does he go to? What does he wear? What does he eat? And even very specific details like his pets. According to him, by the early part of December 2025, the entire force will be ready. The only thing General is waiting for is the alignment of the right conditions to ask for the green light from Donald Trump. Another noticeable detail is the age of the people involved. According to General Kane, the youngest in the group is 20 years old, while the oldest is 49 years old. And yet, in his own words, they were no match for the military power of the United States. As the units approached the target area, General Kane reported that the Night Stalker helicopter was fired upon by the enemy. They immediately retaliated with overwhelming and superior force. And this is probably the scene the general was referring to. How were they being fired upon in this area? It's a short line, but it's deadly. And it's to show that this operation wasn't just secret. It was an actual battle. A series of intense scenes. But according to General Kane, even when one of the helicopters was hit by enemy fire, it kept flying and completed the mission. According to the general himself, the air package deployed in the operation was very large. F-35s, F-15, SEA-18, SE-2, SB-1 bombers, various support aircraft, and also many remotely piloted drones. As the forces approached Caracas, the Joint Air Component began destroying and neutralizing Venezuela's air defense systems, using weapons that ensured the safe passage of helicopters toward the target area. As the helicopter forces flew low and approached the target, they arrived at Nicolas Maduro's compound at exactly 1:01 ante-meridium Eastern Standard Time, or 2:01 ante-meridium local time in Caracas. There, the apprehension forces landed inside the compound and moved with speed, precise actions, and discipline as they isolated and secured the entire area to ensure the success of the mission. The comparison to Operation Neptune Spear against Osama bin Laden is no accident. This came up because the operation was almost identical in form. Elite special forces, night aviation, precise insertion, rapid extraction. However, clearly, there is one huge difference. Aside from the fact that they didn't attack Maduro directly, the context is completely different. In Neptune Spear, the target was a hidden terrorist leader, with no official status, no international recognition, and no formal representation of a state. In Operation Absolute Resolve, the target was a sitting president of a country with a $50 million bounty for his capture. And it wasn't just him who was captured, but also his wife, the country's first lady. That's why, even from a tactical perspective, the operation can be described as clean, swift, precise, and effective. From a strategic perspective, however, this is a time bomb. Because this is not just about capturing a president at dinner. This is an event that has the potential to shake the global order. In international politics, this event triggers immediate reactions, new alliances, divisions, and unexpected effects that are almost beyond anyone's control. Just a few hours after Trump announced the capture of Nicolas Maduro and Leah Flores, the operation shifted from a military base to a judicial base. United States Attorney General Pam Bondi confirmed that both of them were formally charged in the Southern District of New York, one of the most important federal courts in the United States. Meanwhile, inside Venezuela, the atmosphere was described as tense, chaotic, and full of emotional contradiction. Many people felt a strange sensation, an emotion that was difficult to process. In Caracas, a resident said that the situation was very unusual. He pointed out that the streets were somewhat empty, something that could be explained by the early morning hour. But more than that, it was caused by collective shock. Simply put, people couldn't believe what was happening. However, outside the capital, the tone of the reaction was different. Some said that this was not only the best start to 2026, but also the best start of my life. Another person said, I have mixed feelings. I'm extremely happy, but I also remember my friend who lost his life in the pursuit of freedom back in 2014. For us analysts, the immediate future of Venezuela depends on a very important actor, the Venezuelan armed force. At this point, it's too early to know what will happen. However, it's clear that the Venezuelan military will determine the direction. Will they allow the Chavistas to remain in power? Or will they open up a different political scenario? Both Nicolas Maduro and the opposition leader, Maria Corina Machado, are not in the country, so there is an immediate leadership vacuum within the country. In theory, Delcy Rodriguez, the vice president, should take control of the government. And this is a huge change, but it doesn't mean that an entire structure of power has disappeared. Diosdado Cabello is still alive and active. The same goes for Delcy Rodriguez and Vladimir Padrino, the Minister of Defense and a pillar of the Chavista power structure. That's why the reaction of Venezuela's security forces will be crucial in the next steps, especially as people begin to take to the streets. Trump also stated in his announcement that the United States will lead the country and will try to make Venezuela great again through diplomacy. However, he made it clear that if diplomatic means fail, we are not afraid to deploy troops on the ground. We will bring in our huge American oil company, the largest in the world. We'll allocate billions of dollars, fix the destroyed infrastructure, especially the oil infrastructure, and start earning again for the country. We are also ready to launch a second and bigger attack if necessary. In his statements, the president said directly that ground troops are always being discussed. We are not afraid of ground troops if we need to deploy them. Last night, we deployed ground troops at the highest level. We are not afraid and we are not ashamed to say it. Trump also acknowledged that the operation was extremely dangerous, and he knew it could have very serious consequences. We are not doing this without reason. This is a very dangerous operation, an attack that could go terribly wrong. Now, we are in a time of extraordinary events in Latin America. For some, this is good, and for others, it's bad depending on who you ask. History in this region is unfolding in real time, and understanding it as it happens is of great importance. Now, what can you say about what America has done? Was what they did to Venezuela, right? Let us know in the comments. And before we end, subscribe to our channel and we'll see each other again in our next video. Thank you for watching.